All right, if you brought your Bible today, go ahead and pull that out and open up to Joshua chapter 3. Joshua chapter 3. We have been going through the book of Joshua here as a church, and if you didn't bring your Bible today, that's okay. There should be one tucked underneath the seat in front of you close by, or you can also look it up on your phone and just Google Joshua chapter 3, and whatever Google gives you will be sufficient for our time together this morning. But we have really embarked on this journey through the book of Joshua at the beginning of this year, and we have really been enjoying it, actually. The book of Joshua kind of captures the moment in Israelite history. So the book of Joshua is in the Old Testament, which is capturing old Israelite history. And it's that moment in the Israelite history where after Israel, God delivered them out of Egypt and brought them through the Red Sea, and after they wandered through the wilderness for 40 days, 40 days, they wish, 40 years, 40 years, after they wandered through the wilderness for 40 years, that they were on the precipice of what they called the Promised Land, because it was promised to Abraham some 500 years before, so it's cleverly called the Promised Land, okay? And so they're sitting on the edge of it at the beginning of Joshua, and Joshua is all about the Israelites entering into the land and taking possession of it. That's the book of Joshua. And so we have started it at the beginning of this year, and last week we looked at the crossing of the Jordan, and we're going to be in that passage again today. But what we're finding about the book of Joshua, as we're going through it together, and this may surprise you, is that it's not really a book of conquest. It's not really a book that's even primarily about even Joshua at this point, or his particularly good leadership strategies that he employed with the people to get them into the Promised Land. What we're actually finding each and every week almost, it seems, is that this book is about faith. It's about faith in God, what it actually means to trust God, and what that looks like. Like, what exactly is faith? What does it look like? Where does it come from? How does it manifest? What does it lead to? And today we're going to be unpacking the memorial stones in this crossing of the Jordan account. And this is really going to be all about what we're going to find is the maintenance of faith. Like, how do we maintain a faith in this God moving forward as he has invited them and us to participate in his mission in this world in significant ways? How do we maintain that kind of faith? You could think of your favorite maintenance metaphor, to maintaining a garden, to maintaining an automobile, to maintaining anything. Pick your thing you like to maintain. What are the strategies that are used to maintain that? And here in chapter 3 and 4, we're going to see that God creates a strategy for Israel to maintain their faith. And the question is there something here for us that's going to help us maintain our faith? Okay, so we're going to see that it's here in this Jordan crossing miracle. And that God brought them through this because he wanted to give them a similar experience that their parents' generation had 40 years prior when they crossed the Red Sea. Okay, so we looked at this powerful event last week. Like Pastor Dave let us know that it would have been possible to cross this river just on your own. Like, you could have crossed it. The spies crossed it on their own. There's even fords where there's parts of this river that were designed to cross easier. But for one reason or another, God decided, I want to powerfully work here through his presence on the ark to create an event that would invite the entire nation to trust him. Like, imagine walking across a river as there's a wall of water here. That's like trust that each individual would have had to make to cross this river, and something that they could remember that the Lord powerfully acted for us in this crazy way. And it's meant to really invite them to trust him as he's going to invite them to participate in the Promised Land over these coming months and years, which we're going to see. And so we looked at the power of that event last week. But now we're going to look at these 12 memorial stones that they bring up out of the river. And they're typically, I guess, overlooked in this account And the question is, do they really apply to us? How exactly are we supposed to hold on to these to make it say something meaningful about our life today? And Jack, I'm going to ask you. Sorry, could you switch over to the sermon light setting? There's so many lights for the worship one, so that's better. Okay, that's better. Great. Thank you, sir. Nice. That's actually dimmer for me, but I don't know. Anyways, there's just so many lights to light up the whole band. Okay, anyways, so we're crossing in. How do these stones actually apply to our life? That can be a little unclear as we look at this account. And I'm going to assure you that they do. And if you're a particular person like me, you're going to struggle with it. You're going to struggle with it. I'm that type of person. What am I talking about here? Well, I actually became aware that there's this aspect of a person just a month ago or so. So this is newer for me, and I was oh, there's this interesting dichotomy that different individuals are different also in this way. We know that individuals are different in an abundance of way, but in this way, they're also different. I was wow, that's really fascinating to me. And it actually came by, I was reading in a book that was a book of poetry. I don't typically read poetry like our friend Gregor here. I've already discussed this poet with him, though. Where are you, Gregor? He's somewhere. Oh, he's up in kids. He's probably teaching them poetry, Well, that's actually helpful because a lot of the Bible is actually poetry, okay? But I don't typically read poets, but I was reading this article that I was reading that actually pulled in this quote, and I was like, whoa, that's a powerful quote. And I'll read this quote to you guys. This comes from this British-American poet. His name is W.H. Auden. He wrote in the middle of the 1900s, way back in the 1900s, right? The quote went like this. He said, "We would rather be ruined than changed. We would rather die in our dread than climb the cross of the moment and let our illusions die." And I was like, whoa, that is a quote. I got to figure out what poem this came from. And unfortunately, it came from a whole book of poetry. It's this really cool premise, actually. I was like, oh, shoot, I'm going to have to read this whole thing. But then the title of that book was An Age of Anxiety. And I was like, man, this is even more relevant for our population today. And The Age of Anxiety is this kind of poetic prose of a book that really envisions and illustrates four strangers that have met up in a bar and start talking. And these four strangers represent different aspects of a human being that Auden tells us have tragically been ripped apart in the past. One's intellect, one's sensation, one's emotion, and the other's intuition in the gut. And these have been ripped apart in the past. And kind of a nod to the fall. When sin entered the world and broke what it really means to be a human being anymore. But anyways, these were ripped apart, and so this discussion is really interesting as they talk about similar topics, come to different conclusions. Sometimes they come to the same conclusions, but in different ways with different emphasis. It's a really cool work of poetry. I haven't really made it all the way through there, but one of the subjects that Auden explores in these characters is the tension between what he calls a utopian and an Arcadian. A utopian and an Arcadian. And depending on who you are, you're going to tend towards one of these more than the other, okay? And really, both of these are trying to answer the same question, which is, where is the most hope for mankind? Where can we reach in order to find hope? Okay, so one's not better than the other. They're just going to be different, and both of them have some good and real potential. And on the surface, you might think that this is a city and rural dynamic, like Utopia, a city, and Arcadia. It actually references the countryside around Greece, so you might think it's a rural and city dynamic, but it's actually deeper than that. And Auden tells us it's more helpful to think of it like this. Utopians reach to the future to grab hope, while Arcadians reach to the past to grab hope. Okay? So the utopians, they may imagine the ideal, existence and the ideal society that can exist. And so they picture that ideal and they imagine, what can we do that looks like that? They're reaching to the future to try to grab hope and bring it into reality. While the Arcadian tends to do the exact opposite. They reach into the past for hope. They remind themselves of things maybe in their lives or in history that have previously brought significant hope to humanity. And they reach there to pull that into the present. The Arcadian tends to wax like nostalgically, whereas the utopian tends to be more of like an idealist of this is what could be best. And I am a utopian. Now, I've worked on the Arcadian in me, but it's really hard for me. It seems like I always kind of default to like this, like how are we going to find hope? Like trying to imagine what it's going to look like one day, okay? And try to bring that hope, to breathe hope into our existence today. While the Arcadian says, what has brought humanity hope in life and joy in the past? Let's not forget to lean on those things and bring those things in as well. So this is much bigger than like a city-rural divide. Probably the best way to put it is like artists types tend to be drawn towards cities, but they're very Arcadian in their mindset often. You know? Okay, so are you with me? The utopian and the Arcadian, which are you? That's the question. And I developed a test for you. You ready? Do you prefer December or January? December or January? Okay, so the Arcadian enjoys the month of December. There's so much hope here. Look at all they might think in their own life, the past wonderful things that have come in the month of December, or look at history, like the beauty of all that's come and the tradition that the month of December with the holidays kind of unites itself to. Oh, there's so much life in this December. The utopian suffers through December, don't we? Sometimes I felt bad. Someone actually asked me a couple years ago, so it's December, you're a pastor, you love this, right? I'm like, I'm just trying to get through it to get to January, man. You know, like, because in January, that represents for the utopian the clean slate. There's nothing of the past that's weighing me down anymore. There's the opportunity for the new, the fresh, to create something ideal in your life again that you haven't seen and be it like manifest in the past. So which do you prefer, December or January? You know, and then there are Christian expressions of this as well, whereas the utopian, we can look ahead to the future kingdom coming to earth that God promises as heaven comes to earth. And there's resources there to think with an eternal mindset and eternal eyes and ask, how can we bring that hope and manifest it now? But then also the Arcadian, and this is what our passage is going to be looking at today, can say there's ways that God has moved in the past. There's things that he's done. Let's look at those and see what life those are meant to manifest in our midst. And so ideally, all of us can hopefully develop both sides of ourselves. I've been trying over the last month, and I've actually found it really difficult to manifest Arcadian drive and desire in me. You know, and so this is like much harder to do than just talk about. And thankfully for you guys, though, Pastor Dave's an Arcadian. You know, he's a strong Arcadian, good at utopian as well. You know, but probably default to Arcadia, right? You know, and so both of these are really important. But today, what is going to happen is we are going to be leaning into an Arcadian aspect. And depending if you're a utopian, you may struggle with this. And if you're an Arcadian, you may examine how you look for hope in your Christian life to bring it forward. And you may, these memorial stones may sharpen how you do that. They may kind of provide you with the insight of, oh, I think maybe I've been doing this in the wrong way. Or maybe I've been trying to reach back for the wrong things in and of themselves, you know? And so hopefully this can really bring life for all of us, because we need monuments like this. We need this hope from the past of looking at the things that God has done, because utopian ideals and dreams never come to fully pan out. They never do. And that even includes the utopian vision of a Christian life. This is why discouragement is so prevalent everywhere. There's nothing wrong with feeling discouraged. Like following Jesus today can be discouraged. It can be discouraging. It can be frustrating. It can be challenging. We may have all started on this journey of a walk with God, but have become disillusioned with what it actually looks like. We might feel like I was sold a false bill of goods. It was supposed to look completely different of this, and we feel discouraged. We might say things like, "Where are you, God? I thought you said your people would have peace, but I'm still super stressed out. Where are you, God? I thought you said your people would have community, but I'm pretty lonely. Where are you, God? I thought you said that you would help people overcome their sin in this life, but I feel like I'm struggling with this just as much this week as last week. Where are you, God? I thought you said you can fill in the blank for yourself." So the discouragement is part of the Christian life, and it's good to lean into that and put words to it. Discouragement is just an emotion like any other that's meant to bring your awareness to something that needs attention. Now, however, we can let our discouragement really run rampant and turn into despair. And that's what really becomes, can really get us stuck in the mud and get us completely off track from what God is hoping we pay attention to and pursue in this life. And these memorial stones are meant to get us out of those ruts. These memorial stones are meant to give us something to look back at so that we can find life and get back on track. We can get out of being stuck and taking meaningful steps in the directions that God has for us in life. And so I hope that we can discover that today with one another. So with all that said, let's read through this event again to see how God created this monument for this kind of past-gazing memorial that he creates, that he asks them to create, all right? So chapter 3, verse 1. Joshua started early the next morning and left the acacia grove with all the Israelites. They went as far as the Jordan and stayed there before crossing, okay? So they walked towards the Jordan. This is from the east side of the Jordan. The promised land's on the west side of the Jordan. After 3 days, the officers went through the camp and commanded the people, "When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God carried by the Levitical priests, you are to break camp and follow it. But keep a distance of about 1,000 yards between yourselves and the ark. Don't go near it so that you can see the way to go, for you haven't traveled this way before." Joshua told the people, "Consecrate yourselves because the Lord will do wonders among you tomorrow." Then he said to the priests, "Carry the ark of the covenant and go on ahead of the people." So they carried the ark of the covenant and went ahead of them. All right, so now pause for a second. So the end, chapter 2 is the discussion and the unpacking of the account of Rahab. And in chapter 3 here, now we have a lot of things that are just happening, just boom, 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 which means something happened between chapter 2 and chapter 3 that we don't have. And that is that Joshua has received instruction from God on how to enter, okay? And that becomes evident in verse 7. The Lord spoke to Joshua, "Today I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, so they will know that I will be with you just as I was with Moses." All right, so what's taking place here is God has given Joshua the plan, and Joshua is passing that plan along to the Israelite elders and the rest of the people. And so this is meant to feel, this is how we operated with Moses. Okay, Moses would get the stuff from God, the direction from God, and then he would pass it along to us. So that's what's going on here at the beginning of this account. This is meant to be a thing that Joshua is going to be exalted like Moses in the eyes of the people. Okay, verse 8. "Command the priests carrying the ark of the covenant, when you reach the edge of the water, stand in the Jordan." And then verse 9. This is one of I think it should be every, like Dave said last week, every elder's favorite Bible verse, okay? "Then Joshua told the Israelites, 'Come closer and listen to the words of the Lord your God.'" Come closer and listen to the words of the Lord your God. He's saying, pay attention. That's a big application from last week. Pay attention to the words of the Lord your God. He said, "You will know that the living God is among you, and that he will certainly dispossess before you the Canaanites, Hethites, Hivites, Perizzites, Girgashites, Amorites, and Jebusites. when the ark of the covenant of the Lord of the whole earth goes ahead of you into the Jordan. Now choose 12 men from the tribes of Israel, 1 man for each tribe. Okay, so this is part of the plan. These 12 men are going to be the ones that create this memorial. And so Joshua's received this before they actually do it from the Lord. When the feet of the priests who carry the ark of the Lord of the whole earth, come to rest in the Jordan's water, its water will be cut off. The water flowing downstream will stand up in a mass. When the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priests carried the Ark of the Covenant ahead of the people. Now the Jordan overflows its banks throughout the harvest season, so it's kind of in flood stage. But as soon as the priests carrying the Ark reached the Jordan, their feet touched the water at its edge. And the water flowing downstream stood still, rising up in a mass that extended as far as Adam. So this is a city that was in the land. Several miles to the north is what people generally think. And they wouldn't have known this at the time because they're here. So Joshua's writing this towards the end of his life, and he's like, oh yeah, word got back to us that this backed up all the way up to this city of Adam, a city next to Zarethan. The water flowing downstream into the Sea of Arabah, that is the Dead Sea, was completely cut off, and the people crossed opposite Jericho. The priests carrying the Ark of the Lord's covenant stood firmly on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan, while all Israel crossed on dry ground until the entire nation had finished crossing the Jordan. Now after, chapter 4, verse 1, after, or you could even translate this as the entire nation had finished or was finishing crossing the Jordan, the Lord spoke to Joshua, choose 12 men from the people, 1 man for each tribe, and command them, take 12 stones from this place in the middle of the Jordan where the priests are standing. Carry them with you and set them down at the place where you spend the night. And we're going to find that this was about 4 miles away. So these 12 men each had an individual rock that they carried for 4 miles. So likely these weren't huge boulders because they carried them for a ways. And they would have known that before. And they're like, I'm going to carry this for 4 miles. Shouldn't choose the biggest one. Maybe they did anyhow. Depends on the personality, I guess. Okay. So Joshua summoned the 12 men he had selected from the Israelites, 1 man for each tribe, and said to them, go across to the ark of the Lord your God in the middle of the Jordan. Each of you lift a stone onto his shoulder, 1 for each of the Israelite tribes, so that this will be a sign among you. Now, sign, this is actually comes up at several points in the Old Testament where stones are used as signs. And you'll see it called elsewhere in the Old Testament, if you read through the Old Testament, something called an Ebenezer stone. This is a stone coming from the place where God did something that was meant to memorialize what God has done. So if you've ever read the verse on a song that says, here I raise my Ebenezer, come thou fount of every blessing, this song, here, that's not Ebenezer Scrooge. That's an Ebenezer stone, okay? That's what they're called, Ebenezer stones, okay? So that this will be a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, what do these stones mean to you? You should tell them, the water of the Jordan was cut off in front of the ark of the Lord's covenant. When it crossed the Jordan's water was cut off. Therefore, these stones will always be a memorial for the Israelites. There's that word memorial. The Israelites did just as Joshua had commanded them. The 12 men took stones from the middle of the Jordan, 1 for each of the Israelite tribes, just as the Lord had told Joshua. They carried them to the camp and set them down there. Joshua also set up 12 stones in the middle of the Jordan, where the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant were standing. The stones are still there today. Now, some of the leading scholars in Joshua suggest a different slightly different translation for verse 9, because the fact that there would be a second monument here that's treated with so little attention is a little bit strange. And then some of the Hebrew words are a little strange as well. And so you could even translate this, so Joshua set up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan where the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant were standing. So this would be more of like a concluding sentence saying that there's really only one memorial. There's not one memorial at camp and one in the middle of the Jordan. It's debated, but that's there as well. There could be only one. it's probably likely, unless God is like actively working to like not make the river move these stones over the course of these coming years, because it says their stones are still there today. It would be unlikely that this river, which experiences flood and not, would actually preserve this memorial for years and decades and decades. So anyways, so that's verse 9. But the priest carrying the ark continued standing in the middle of the Jordan until everything was completed that the Lord had commanded Joshua to tell the people, in keeping with all that Moses had commanded Joshua. That's interesting. Moses is dead, by the way. Okay. The people hurried across, and after everyone had finished crossing, the priests with the ark of the Lord crossed in the sight of the people. The Reubenites, Gadites, and half-tribe of Manasseh went in battle formation in front of the Israelites as Moses had instructed them. About 40,000 equipped for war crossed to the plains of Jericho in the Lord's presence. On that day, the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they revered him throughout his life as they had revered Moses. Mission accomplished. That right? That's back in 3 verse 7. It said, this is what God said I'm going to do. Boom, it's fulfilled right here. The Lord told Joshua, command the priests who carry the ark of the testimony to come up from the Jordan. So Joshua commanded the priests, come up from the Jordan. When the priests carrying the ark of the Lord's covenant came up from the middle of the Jordan, their feet stepped out on solid ground. The water of the Jordan resumed its course, flowing over all the banks as before. All right, now, and these last verses are going to be with reference to the memorial again. The people came up from the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month and camped at Gilgal on the eastern limits of Jericho. When Joshua set up in Gilgal the 12 stones they had taken from the Jordan, and he said to the Israelites, in the future when your children ask their fathers, what is the meaning of these stones? You should tell your children, Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the water of the Jordan before you until you had crossed over, just as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up before us until we had crossed over. So Joshua experienced both of these events. That's why he says us there. This is so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the Lord's hand is mighty. So I kind of picture that God's hand came down and cut the river off. I have no basis for that in the text. I just kind of like, God's hand stopped the river, okay? And so you may always fear the Lord your God. So what is great about these chapters is we are not left guessing whatsoever what these stones are about. It's made very, very clear what God hopes to accomplish by them. He gives 5 reasons for these stones. And so as we consider how this might be applied in our life, I want us to be able to grasp the reasons for these stones, and then we'll see how this is meant to be manifest in our life. All right, so 5 things. The first thing, this event was to accomplish, like we said, the stones were meant to point to the time when Joshua was exalted in the sight of all Israel. All right, the event was to accomplish that, and these stones were in part meant to memorialize the exaltation of Joshua. Joshua is writing this at a very much later date, and he's confirming, right there in 4:14, he confirms, yes, they revered him throughout his life as they had revered Moses. This is like firsthand testimony. Yep, they did that. They started treating me like Moses, which is really, really fast. It took this to do it. He's already done so much incredible stuff to get to this point, but it's here that Joshua was beginning to be exalted in the eyes of his people. So he functioned like we talked about. He's going to get the game plan from God. We're going to see this in Joshua. He's going to bring it back to the people, just like Moses operated in the wilderness for the people of God. Now we're told a second thing that this memorial was to recall even before it happened. In verses 9 and 10 of chapter 3, the second thing it's supposed to recall is when Joshua tells them to listen. It says, come closer and listen to the words of the Lord your God. He said, through this event, you will know that the living God is among you, and that he will certainly dispossess all these peoples. You will know that The living God is among you. This is huge. This is huge, especially for a memorial, because what do all the memorials that we see around here, and this has been true not just of like America, but every country, everywhere, in all time, what do the memorials typically do? They point to dead people, right? They point to dead people who have died and done great things. Memorials typically point towards them. This memorial is pointing to a living God. All other memorials tend to point towards people who are dead, who can't do anything anymore. This memorial points to a living God who is still active and working on behalf of his people. That's what these stones are meant to do. That's the second thing. These humble 12 stones aren't particularly large or impressive when we compare it to other memorials as well, right? Like they're just 12 rocks out of the middle of a river that 12 guys carried for 4 or 5 miles and put down in a pile. How it's kind of counterintuitive. How are these supposed to really capture what the infinitely powerful creator of the earth has done, who did something that no man has ever done, which is miraculously stop a river? Why would God choose to do it like this? Because he doesn't have to overcompensate, essentially. He doesn't need a huge statue made of metal crafted by the best of artisans. He lets his works speak for themselves. They're ordinary. Just grab a few rocks, guys. They're going to be enough. It's not like back in these days people lacked the extraordinary capabilities and ingenuity and creativity to make impressive monuments. They did. But God says, no, just get a dozen rocks. It's going to be fine. This is going to be a great memorial. This is enough. I don't need to overcompensate. This event is powerful enough to speak for itself. Just grab a dozen rocks and pile them up. And they were enough. By the end of Joshua's life, we see they're still standing there. Okay? So that's the second reason for the memorial stones, that God, it's really a proclamation that Israel's God is a living and active God. The third reason for the stones is found in chapter 4, where Joshua explicitly shares why God told him that you're going to make this monument. It's in verse 7. Verse 7, you should tell them, let's back up to verse 5. 4. Let's go 4. So Joshua summoned the 12 men he had selected from the Israelites, one man for each tribe, and said to them, go across to the ark of the Lord your God in the middle of the Jordan. Each of you lift up a stone on his shoulder, one each of you for the Israelite tribes, so that this will be a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, what do these stones mean to you? You should tell them, the water of the Jordan was cut off in front of the ark of the Lord's covenant when it crossed the Jordan. The Jordan's water was cut off. Therefore, these stones will always, underline always, be a memorial for the Israelites. So what is this memorial meant to do? What is it for? It's meant to start conversations. These 12 ordinary stones were meant to be treated in a special way or in a holy way. The ordinary treated as holy in such a way, they were treated so specially that it would inspire curiosity and questioning and lead to conversations. Why are you treating those 12 river rocks like that? Why have we set up all this attention and fanfare around these 12 rocks? What do they mean to you? And what was meant to follow was an explanation of the incredible work and event that God did to stop the water flowing in the river, to help his people trust him, let them know that they could rely on him. And this is a conversation that wasn't just meant to be had between the the generation that experienced it and the next generation, but it says always there, right? See how it said, therefore these stones will always be a memorial for the Israelites. It was meant to be a memorial to the living and active God that inspired conversation from one generation to the next generation to the next generation. Imagine 3, 4, 5 generations later. how did these stones get here? Let me tell you, child. These stones are here because when we came into the promised land, God powerfully stopped up the river. And those stones are from the middle of the river where he stopped it up. And we experienced that as a people because out of his love and direction for us, he said that he showed us that he could stop the river to help us trust him as we entered into this land. And so that we could know that we could listen to his words and trust anything that he would tell us to do so that we could do it. That's why those are here. These stones are meant to be a memorial so that people could talk about the special power and love of God that had manifest in the midst of the people of God in the past. So that's the third reason for this memorial, that ordinary things treated holy would inspire conversation about a powerful and loving God. All right, the fourth and the fifth reasons for the stones are kind of tied together here in the conclusion of the event as a whole. We see it's kind of said the same way as the third one, but there's different emphases here. Let's start in verse 20. Then Joshua set up in Gilgal the 12 stones they had taken from the Jordan, and he said to the Israelites, "In the future, when your children ask their fathers, 'What is the meaning of these stones?' you should tell your children, 'Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground.'" Okay, so we kind of read that already, but now we have two kind of additional ones here. "For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan before you until you had crossed over, just as he had done to the Red Sea, which he dried up before us until we had crossed over." Okay, now the two reasons are in verse 24. "This is so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the Lord's hand is mighty, and so that you may always fear the Lord your God." Those are the fourth and the fifth reasons for the stones. So the fourth reason is so that all the people of the earth, all peoples who would come into contact with this, see these stones treated in a holy way and hear this powerful story of what God has done, that they may know that the Lord's hand is mighty. Now, this is a really interesting dual statement. It kind of has two purposes that this would bring. The first would be that it's invitational. There is a mighty God over us as a people. You can throw yourself upon him if you need help. And in doing that, that would mean, as we're going to see in the coming chapters, becoming part of the Israelite people. Rahab did this. So you can throw yourself on God. This is an open invitation. He is powerful. He is mighty. He's looking out for us. You can throw yourself upon him. Now, there's another emphasis towards this, which is this is a memorial of God's power set up near the border of Israel. And so there's a subtext here that's like, don't mess with us. Our God is powerful. He's living. He's active. He loves us. He has plans for us. Don't mess with that. Don't mess with him. Don't mess with Texas. Don't mess around. If you try to invade, our God acts powerfully on our behalf. This is what these stones are saying. So it's kind of like a warning, a caution, a beware to anyone who comes up after us and is behind us that wants to come into this. So you have the beautiful invitation and you have this warning at the same time to all the peoples of the earth that would come into contact with these stones. Let us tell you a story of what our God has done. You're invited to that. Don't work against him. Now that may feel a little intense, and it does. Let's not say may. This is an intense statement to all the peoples of the earth. But Joshua lets us know that this is an intense statement not meant only for them, but also for God's very own people, the Israelites. Did you see it? And so that you may always fear the Lord your God. Now, a lot of work has been done, a lot of ink has been spilled over this notion of what it means to fear the Lord. This is a phrase that's repeated over and over throughout the Old Testament. On its face, it actually doesn't mean straight terror, Like, you're not supposed to be terrorized of this notion of God. But in this fear of the Lord phrase is really packed into this notion that you have seen God move, you recognize that God moved, you understand that he's the God like Rahab did of the heavens and the earth, that he's over everything and he can stick his finger in any part of it and do anything he wants whenever he wants. So there should be like a reverence to that reality of like, remember guys, this is a God who moves. Stand in awe of him. Think twice. Remember, seeking his will is first and foremost what we're about as his people. Revere that. Yield to that. Lean into that. Respect that. Honor him as God. All of these things are really present in this fear of the Lord. We could probably do a whole sermon on what does the fear of the Lord mean, and go through the Old Testament and really see all the incredible things that God has invited us to in this phrase of fear the Lord. It's not be terrified of him, but it's really to grasp him for who he really is, the best of our abilities. We can't really ever do it fully, but grasp who he shows himself to be to us, probably a better way to put it, and respect and revere him as a result. So, those are the 5 things that this memorial was meant to point to, okay? Exalt Joshua in the eyes of God's people, testify that God's people follow a living and active God, create conversations surrounding how God powerfully acts for his people, an invitation and a warning to all peoples of the earth who would encounter it, and 5th, to continue to inspire God's people to be amazed by him and stand in awe of who he is and what he's done. So, what does this have to do with us? How does this apply to us? Is this something that we're supposed to do? Like, are we supposed to go out into the world and get stones and put them in piles and try to treat them with the same level of intentionality and respect and remembrance that the Israelites did with these stones for decades and perhaps hundreds of years? I don't think so. Now, I know that sometimes people do this. They do grab stones from momentous or big points in their lives that God has, they've seen him act, and this is good, and there's nothing wrong with that, but that's not a direct application of something like this. Not everyone has to do that. Now, you don't need rocks at all, and in fact, you're already doing this if you're a Christian. Likely. If you're a utopian, you might only be engaging it at a shallow level, like I sometimes do. Or if you're an Arcadian, you might be skipping over this most important memorial to other things and looking at those to bring you hope. But this really is kind of the big S sign that it is. This thing that kind of looks into the past to try to bring you hope for now. Let me show you what it is. It's this. Here it is. It's the Lord's Supper. It's communion. You're already encountering this. You're already experiencing it. And this is really meant to help you ask the question, or are you? Or are you? If you're anything like me, sometimes, perhaps often, you're not. You're not experiencing the fullness of the hope that this table is meant to bring. Because here's the primary memorial that Jesus set up in his life. Like, Jesus started this. He set it up on the night he was betrayed. He set it up on the night he went to the garden and sweat drops of blood. He set it up on the night he was handed over to the authorities, unjustly convicted. He set it up on the night that he took the lashes from the whip and went to the cross and died. Jesus set up this memorial. And he said, do this in remembrance of me. Several decades later, the Apostle Paul actually writes down a kind of, we use it sometimes like a formula for this, and it goes like this. It's from 1 Corinthians 10. I think we'll have it on a slide behind me. But 1 Corinthians 10, starting in verse 23. Oh no, that doesn't feel like the right passage. 11. Thank you. Sorry, Emily, I did you dirty. Sorry, Emily. It's okay. 11. Thank you. Yeah, verse 23. Okay. For I received from the Lord what I also passed on to you. Stop. That's important. Do you feel the generation statement there? I received that I pass on to you. This is what Paul is doing. He's leaning into the memorial as a way to pass from generation to generation to generation. And here's what's really, really fascinating. Paul wasn't there that night. He's not one of the 12 disciples that was there that actually received it from Jesus. Which means what? He's the next chain in the generation. And he's still saying, I received this. I pass it to you. That's fascinating. This is how the Lord's Supper is meant to be done. And it's been passed down from generation. You see that? So I received from the Lord what I also passed on to you, Paul says, to the Corinthian church. On the night when he was betrayed, the Lord Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it. And he said, this is my body, which is broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me. In the same way, also, he took the cup after supper and said, this cup is the new covenant in my blood. Poured out, do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. Now, and I forget which one of the gospel accounts, Jesus also adds on, when he gives it to his disciples at the Last Supper, that the cup was poured out for the forgiveness of sin. So sometimes we say that as we partake of it together as a church, kind of match those together. Poured out for forgiveness of sin. This is the memorial that Jesus instated with his followers. And it checks all 5 of the boxes. All 5 of them. First, the cross and the resurrection was the event that exalted another Joshua, Jesus. Jesus' real name was Yeshua. Jesus is the Latinized version of it, but his real name is Yeshua, which is Joshua. Okay. So the cross and the resurrection is that event that exalted Jesus and magnified Jesus. It's the event that his glory is really tied to. Now, Jesus did a lot of other great things. He had great teaching. He healed the lame, the deaf, the mute. He took a couple loaves and a couple fish, and he fed 5,000 people from it. He walked on water. He calmed it. He did all of these things, just like Joshua had done a lot of things before this point as well. He was one of the original spies that went into the land 40 years prior that was faithfully returned a good message of trust in the Lord. He did all this other stuff in the book of Deuteronomy you can read. Joshua's doing a lot of other stuff. He's not magnified, fully glorified until this memorial event. It's really interesting. Jesus is the same. In fact, in the Gospel of John, in chapter 3, and I think it's in chapter 12, Jesus actually refers to his death by saying the Son of Man must be lifted up. And he's referring to his death and resurrection. Lifted up. It's glory language. Exalted in the eyes of the people. So that's the first box. It's really checked. So as we approach this table, we really recall the cross and the resurrection and how Jesus Christ, the glory of the cross is incredibly beautiful. That he came and in order to make a pathway for rebellious sinners back into relationship with him, he said, I'll give up my life for that. It's incredibly glorious that one man would give up his life for another. So sometimes I think one man, I forget the scripture, one man will do that for another. Sometimes that'll happen. But for an enemy, Jesus came down to us when we were enemies of God to give up his life that we might be made whole again. So as we approach this table, we recall the cross and the resurrection and the glory that's tied into it and packed into it. This is who God is at great cost to himself because of his love for us. He died. Second, the Lord's Supper is a proclamation that we follow a living and active God. This is not a table of defeat, that God is dead. This is a table of victory. of life. It's proclamation that God actively and powerfully raised Jesus from the grave to life and promises to do the same for all of us. This is a table of life, a table that says God is still working in the world today, that Jesus still sits at the right hand of the Father interceding for us, a lot like how Joshua seemed to be interceding between Israel, the people of Israel, and God. Jesus is still doing that nowadays, and he's breathing direction into his followers. He's breathing life into us by his Holy Spirit, and that same life which conquered the grave somehow mysteriously lives in us now. And so there's resources there for that. It's incredibly hopeful. Look at this past event which unlocked life for us. So as we approach this table, we remind ourselves that not only our God is alive, but he's alive and with us and working and acting, involved in our lives, moving, working. The third sign. Just as the 12 ordinary stones were meant to be treated with a level of holiness that was meant to inspire conversations, that's what this table is meant to do. That's really what it does. I don't know when you first encountered this table, whether it was like in a church you grew up in and you saw your parents doing it, or if you came into a church later in your life and you saw the people of God engaging this, but whenever it was, wherever it was, whatever it looked like, because I can look at a variety of different ways. There's no formula for how this exactly, whatever it looked like, I can guarantee you it seemed odd to you. Like, it's strange to treat a loaf of bread and a cup of it's juice, guys, juice. These are so plain. You see them throughout your week, but here they're special. As God's people come together, they're incredibly special, incredibly important, and they're meant to inspire conversation. What is this about? Let me tell you. Let me tell you, when humanity was rebelling against God, he came down in the person of Jesus Christ, and he went to the cross as an atoning sacrifice for our sin, which means that all the bad stuff that we've done and all the good stuff that we won't do, all of that falling short, he took upon himself and received the separation of God, the penalty of God for that on the cross. His body was broken. His blood was poured out. He was buried in a tomb. He was resurrected 3 days later so that we could have life and life abundantly. That's what this is all about. The powerful and loving and gracious and merciful thing that our God has done. It's incredibly special. It's incredibly important. And so as we approach this table, as 80 generations have done before us, 80 generations, we remember that through these ordinary things treated special, God has acted. And hopefully we're able to have that conversation with as many people as possible. This is what this table means. This is what this table tells us about who this God must be and what he's done and how he loves us and how nothing can separate us from him. That's what this table's for. It's the third thing. To remember the cross and resurrection of Christ in that way. Now we need a little bit of a sidebar here. Because if God is active in our lives and doing things in our lives and has acted in our lives powerfully to even reveal himself to us individually, we can remember those things too as we come to this table. You don't have to experience something. You don't have to have these kind of events of experience with God. It's okay if you say, hey, I haven't necessarily experienced something like that where God has revealed himself to me. That's okay. You don't have to experience something like that to be a Christian or to follow Jesus. People aren't made Christians by the experiences they've had from God directly, but because they trust in what he has done and how his presence showed up 2,000 years ago. And so if you haven't had some experience with God, don't feel inferior. Maybe you could even feel like your faith might even be stronger because you haven't needed that to trust that took place in a certain sense. So don't feel inferior at all. But if you, this is the big S sign I guess I would say, or a memorial of the cross. God does step into our lives and give us kind of small s signs. Like, I'm kind of jamming off of that from Joshua 4, verse 6, right? Like, so that this will be a sign among you. Like, this is a big S sign among you. There are little s signs, and we actually saw one a chapter before in Joshua chapter 2, when Rahab requests a sign that God will be faithful, that they're going to be faithful to her. And they give her a scarlet cord and they hang it in the window. That's like a very tangible sign that I don't know how long Rahab held on to that. But I would guess she probably did. It was probably really like special to her that this is the sign that God loves me. And in a similar way, perhaps you guys have some of these stories that, oh yeah, this is when I really experienced God's love for me in a significant way. Perhaps it's like a story similar to mine where you were standing in a gymnasium and there is a youth group worship pastor trying to be too cool, leading worship music with a worship band that was a bunch of middle school, high school students. It didn't sound very good. On a night of the week where you felt most awful and terrible about yourself, but you felt the arms of God wrap around you. Like you experienced his love for you. You can bring those experiences that you have into this time as well, as we remember this sign. This sign points back towards the cross, the resurrection, and that God is actively moving in individual and personal ways in all of our lives. And so if that helps you engage this Arcadian past gazing hope, you can gaze back to these small S signs and then further back to this big S sign that's meant to. So anyways, as you approach this table, you can do that as well, okay? So I just wanted to talk about that as well, that those aren't off limits. Those are often super helpful. We can't remember those things too often either. Okay, so let's go to the fourth reason. What was the fourth reason? The message to the outsider. Complete invitation, complete caution. It's the same. This table, it memorializes how the death and resurrection of Jesus are for everybody, for all who say they want to trust him in this life and for the next. Okay, this is for anybody who wants it. And if you are making that statement even for the first time, you don't have to check with someone. You can just come to the table and you can do that. That's how we roll around here. You can do that. It's a free gift. In fact, I shouldn't say you can take it. You can't take it. It's a free gift. You can only receive it. You can only really receive it. You can't take it from God. This memorial is a gift. It's a gift. And there's a caution. Don't receive it lightly. It's a big deal. It's a big deal to unite with this meal. It's a big deal to unite with this God. It's a big deal to unite to this people. It's not something that is small or unimportant or just It's a big deal. It's a big deal. So don't just take advantage of this as if you might take advantage of something, trying to get something from God. He gives himself to you. And that's what this is a memorial of, that he's given us his very self, the best thing. C.S. Lewis actually carries this notion a bit when there's like a discussion of Aslan, who's meant to represent God in the book, The Chronicles of Narnia. Someone's asked of Aslan, is he good? Yes, he is good, but he's not safe. He's not safe. So communion is a shared meal, a shared table. And so receiving communion by yourself doesn't really make necessarily much sense. It's a big corporate, big S sign that points to all that God has done in history to bring humans to himself. But more importantly and more crucially, to bring a communal bride to himself. This is like one of the metaphors that the New Testament writers pick up on. That God's bringing a people, a bride to himself. And he's the perfect husband. So he's going to defend and protect his bride in the same way that this memorial stone, he's going to protect Israel. He's going to protect his bride because he's a perfect husband. Actually, Paul kind of points to this reality in 1 Corinthians chapter 3. I wanted you to see it. Hopefully it's the right chapter this time. Yes, we did a good job. Good, okay. But he says it like this: don't you yourselves know that you are God's temple? And he's speaking, the context in here is church unity. So you could also translate, don't you all know that you are God's temple? That you yourselves is plural, but the temple is singular, right? That you are God's temple and that the Spirit of God lives in you. If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy him. For God's temple is holy, and that is what you are. God protects his bride. Okay. And fifthly, it almost, and perhaps even most importantly, the fear of the Lord. It tends to serve, this fifth one almost serves as like a litmus test that you've engaged the Lord's Supper in the first 4 ways, actually, which is really interesting. The fear of the Lord, I would say it still is, kind of resides in the realm of emotion. And you really can't conjure emotion. Emotion is typically a response of something else that has taken place, whether that you've encountered or accepted or realized. Emotion is like a response. And so this first one, having a fear of the Lord, is almost like a litmus test that you've engaged this with the other 4 that are kind of present as you do that. And so reaching into this past, remembering what God has done in exalting Jesus Christ, really letting this fact that God is a living and active God and loving God, he's moving. And so together, this simple meal is, we treat it something as holy. It's just something incredible in the hopes that it might spark conversations among ourselves and with people who are encountering it perhaps for the first time, that there's complete invitation and caution as we come to this table. All of those things really inspire fear of the Lord, of reverence to his action and his movement and what he's doing, both largely through the cross and the resurrection in individuals' lives, in our midst, in the greater world. That this event shook history, and his power is emanating from it for 2,000 years in as many lands as it can. Like, that's the fear of the Lord setting in. Like, oh my gosh, God is doing something, and it's big. It's bigger than I can imagine it. His body was bloodied and broken so that it could come to pass. And I have a chance to participate in that, both now and forevermore. And so let this communion, let this table be a memorial for you, coming from these 12 stones with these 5 things that can help you reach into the past. Let it hold open the possibility that this can bring you hope as you engage it. And I can't wait to hear about what we all find as we continue to engage this faithfully as Jesus' people have for 2,000 years. Let's pray.